Money whispers, power hides, but prejudice always reveals itself. Singapore. 2:14 a.m. outside the glass walls of Changi Airport. Tropical rain hammered the runway like static against a dying radio signal. Inside the private first-class lounge of Orion International Airways, the world looked untouched by reality. Crystal champagne glasses, Italian leather luggage, designer watches worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Everyone looked important. Everyone wanted to be seen, except one man. In the far corner of the lounge, sitting quietly beneath the dim golden lighting, was a tired Asian passenger in a gray hoodie. No luxury suitcase, no expensive jewelry, no attention, and yet he was the most powerful person in the building. His name was Ethan Park. 38 years old. Most people would have walked past him without remembering his face. That was the point Ethan never cared about. Appearances, not after spending nearly 15 years building one of the most feared cybersecurity companies on Earth. Aegis Quantum. Systems that governments trusted them. Banks depended on them. Military contractors paid them billions. And tonight, Orion International Airways was surviving because of them. 3 weeks earlier, a ransomware attack had penetrated the airline's internal infrastructure. Not publicly, not yet, but behind closed doors, executives were panicking. Flight systems had vulnerabilities. Payment networks were unstable. Passenger databases had already been targeted twice. If Aegis pulled protection for even a few hours, the airline could collapse into chaos. And the quiet man sitting alone with a backpack beside his shoes was the founder who controlled all of it. But nobody in that lounge knew. To them, he was just another tired Asian passenger who didn't belong. Orion International Airways looked untouchable from the outside. Luxury branding, celebrity partnerships, private lounges in 12 countries. But underneath the polished image, the company was bleeding. Debt had reached dangerous levels. Executives were desperately negotiating emergency investor support behind the scenes. And their cybersecurity infrastructure was years behind modern attack standards. One successful breach could freeze international operations. Overnight, the board knew it, the CEO knew it, and Ethan Park knew it better than anyone, because his company had spent the last 21 days preventing disaster. Almost hour by hour, every delayed attack, every blocked intrusion, every protected server was being held together by the man nobody was looking at. Meanwhile, across the lounge, wealthy passengers laughed over champagne while scrolling headlines about the future of luxury air travel. None of them realized the airline around them was quietly standing on the edge of collapse. Ethan noticed the looks immediately. The subtle double takes, the silent judgments. A man in a tailored navy suit glanced at Ethan's hoodie, then at his own Rolex. A luxury travel influencer quietly shifted her designer handbag closer. An older couple stopped talking the moment Ethan sat near them. Nobody said anything directly. Not yet, but the message was already clear. You do not belong here. Ethan had seen this his entire life. People trusted uniforms, titles, luxury brands, not silence. And definitely not someone who looked ordinary. Still, he said nothing. No anger, no defense, no need to prove himself. He simply sat there quietly, while rain rolled down the glass behind him, watching the runway lights disappear into the storm. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Boarding for Orion Air Flight 2117 to Los Angeles began. Passengers slowly stood, adjusting jackets and collecting luxury luggage. Near the gate entrance, a woman in a perfectly tailored uniform monitored every person entering first class with cold precision. Victoria Hale, Senior First Class Director. Elegant, controlled, obsessed with image. Her eyes moved across each passenger automatically until they stopped on Ethan Park. Gray hoodie, sneakers, backpack. Her expression changed instantly. Not suspicion, something worse. Disgust. And in that single moment, the entire future of Orion Air International quietly began to collapse. At the boarding gate of Orion International Airways Flight 217, everything was designed to feel flawless. Soft lighting, perfect signage, quiet authority. This was first-class boarding, where perception mattered more than truth. And then she saw him, Victoria Hale, Senior First Class Director. Her job wasn't just service, it was control. Control of image, control of standards, control of who belonged. Her eyes locked onto Ethan Park immediately. Gray hoodie, backpack, simple sneakers. No visible status markers. In her world, that was enough. She didn't see a passenger. She saw a risk. Victoria didn't hesitate. She had seen thousands of passengers, and she had learned one rule. People like that don't belong in first class. She leaned slightly toward her tablet. One quick scan. Passenger profile loaded. Ethan Park. Verified ticket. Seat, first class. System status, green. Everything was technically correct. But Victoria didn't trust systems. She trusted instinct, and her instinct was screaming, "This is wrong." Victoria stepped forward. Her voice was polite, but sharp. "Sir, may I see your physical boarding credentials?" Ethan paused, not confused, not nervous, just calm. He reached for his wallet slowly. Around them, passengers began to notice. A man in an expensive suit glanced over. A travel influencer stopped recording her phone. An older couple leaned closer. Victoria continued. "Also, your identification, please." Now it wasn't private anymore. It was performance. Ethan said nothing. He simply complied, quietly, without resistance. And that silence made people uncomfortable. The energy shifted. Not because of Ethan, but because of how people looked at him. Judgment spreads faster than truth. A man in a tailored suit whispered something to his colleague. A luxury influencer stopped smiling. An elderly couple looked uncomfortable, but stayed silent. Nobody defended him. Not one person. Because in moments like this, silence feels safer than justice. Victoria felt it too, and instead of stopping, she doubled down. Victoria made her decision, not based on evidence, but authority. She turned slightly to her headset. "Security to Gate 17. Possible credential mismatch." The words sounded procedural, but the impact was personal. Ethan finally looked up. Not angry, not afraid, just quietly disappointed, as if he had already seen this outcome before it happened. And that moment was the first real mistake Victoria Hale made that night. The terminal grew quieter the moment airport security arrived. Two officers approached calmly through the boarding lane. Professional, controlled, used to uncomfortable situations. Victoria Hale stepped aside slightly, arms folded with quiet satisfaction. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Every nearby passenger looked up immediately. Phones lowered, conversations stopped. For a moment, the entire gate area focused on one man in a gray hoodie. Ethan Park slowly stood, no arguing, no panic, no attempt to explain himself, only silence. And somehow, that silence made the situation feel even heavier as security prepared to escort him away. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost tired. "You should call your corporate office before this becomes irreversible." Victoria stared at him for a second, then smirked. Not because she understood him, but because she thought she already had. To her, this sounded familiar. Another difficult passenger pretending to have connections. Another entitled traveler trying to scare staff. She had seen it before, or at least she thought she had, the moment Ethan disappeared beyond the boarding gate. The atmosphere changed instantly. People relaxed. A businessman adjusted his jacket and muttered quietly, "Good, security matters." An influencer shook her head and laughed under her breath. The older couple returned to their conversation as if nothing had happened. To them, the problem had been removed, order restored, luxury protected, and none of them realized they had just watched the beginning of a corporate disaster. Meanwhile, far from the crowded boarding gate, Ethan Park walked alone through a silent private terminal. Corridor. Rain reflected against the massive glass walls beside him. The airport suddenly felt colder now. Not emotionally, operationally, like something invisible had already started moving beneath the surface. Ethan stopped near the end of the hallway, then reached into his pocket for his phone. No anger, no revenge, only decision. Ethan made one phone call, that was all. No threats, no dramatic speeches, just calm corporate authority. Terminate all active emergency stabilization. Protocols for Orion International Airways. A short pause. Then, and notify executive leadership the partnership discussion is suspended indefinitely. On the other end of the line, silence. Because everyone inside Aegis Quantum Systems understood exactly what that meant. And within seconds, the future of an international airline quietly began to unravel. At 3:11 a.m. Singapore time, small failures began appearing inside the operational network of Orion International Airways. At first, nobody panicked. A delayed authentication request. A frozen internal dashboard. A payment verification timeout. Normal technical problems. Until they started spreading. 1 airport became 3. 3 became 12. Then entire regional systems began disconnecting simultaneously. Inside the airline's headquarters, people stopped talking. Because everyone in the room understood the same terrifying reality at exactly the same moment. Aegis Quantum Systems had pulled out. The official notice arrived less than 4 minutes later. Emergency stabilization contracts terminated immediately. Reason? Discriminatory misconduct against the founder of Aegis Quantum Systems. During active corporate negotiations, the email spread internally like fire. Executives reread the message over and over, not because it was unclear, but because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. One incident at a boarding gate had just triggered a multinational corporate crisis, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Orion International Airways was already unstable. Debt obligations were tightening. Merger negotiations were fragile. Investors were nervous, and now the company's most important cybersecurity protection had vanished overnight. Then came the cascade. Flights delayed across multiple countries. Boarding systems freezing mid-scan. Digital payments failing at airport terminals. Fuel suppliers temporarily suspending automated approvals until system verification returned. Passengers trapped inside terminals from Tokyo to Los Angeles. Not because the airline had collapsed instantly, but because modern Aviation depends on invisible systems working together every second, and suddenly, those systems were no longer protected. Stock prices dropped before sunrise. Internal investors began pulling emergency calls. Financial analysts demanded explanations. Inside headquarters, panic finally became visible. At 3:46 a.m., the CEO of Orion International Airways finally received the full incident report. He read it once, then again, silently. The passenger removed from first class was Ethan Park, founder and CEO of Aegis Quantum Systems, the same man currently negotiating a $1.4 billion stabilization partnership with the airline, the same man protecting their infrastructure from active ransomware threats, and the same man their staff had publicly humiliated less than an hour earlier. For several seconds, nobody inside the executive conference room spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The damage had already begun. Some disasters happen with explosions, others happen in silence. One executive decision, one moment of arrogance, one assumption about a man in a gray hoodie. That was all it took. Across the world, Orion International Airways was beginning to freeze from the inside out. And somewhere beyond the storm-covered runway of Singapore, Ethan Park calmly watched the city lights disappear through the window of a departing private jet. Orion Flight 217 had already begun taxiing toward the runway when the cockpit received the message. Return to gate immediately. No explanation. No delay code. Just urgency. Inside first class, passengers exchanged confused looks as the aircraft slowly turned away from the runway lights. Flight attendants suddenly stopped smiling. Phones came out. Whispers spread row by row. Something was wrong, very wrong, and somewhere near the front of the cabin, Victoria Hale's phone began vibrating non-stop. Victoria answered the call with professional confidence. That confidence disappeared within seconds. Her expression froze, then drained completely. The voice on the other end wasn't angry. That made it worse. Miss Hale, executive leadership is on the way to Gate 17. A pause. You removed Ethan Park from this flight. Another pause. Then the final sentence. Do you understand what you've done? For the first time that night, Victoria said nothing. News moved through the aircraft faster than any announcement. The quiet man in the gray hoodie was Ethan Park, founder of Aegis Quantum Systems, the man responsible for protecting Orion International Airways from a live cybersecurity crisis. The same man negotiating a $1 billion stabilization agreement with the airline. Passengers who had mocked him earlier now avoided eye contact completely. The businessman stared silently at the floor. The influencer deleted videos from her phone. Even the older couple looked shaken. Because the situation was no longer social, it was historical. Everyone suddenly realized they had witnessed the exact moment a corporation damaged itself in public. When the aircraft returned to Gate 17, senior executives were already waiting. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody caused a scene. That was the terrifying part. Victoria Hale stood silently as corporate security approached beside two executive officers. Her access badge was removed. Her company tablet collected. Employment terminated effective immediately. Professional, cold, final. The same passengers who had supported her minutes earlier now looked away completely. Because power only feels safe until it changes direction. Meanwhile, far from the terminal chaos, Ethan Park quietly boarded a private jet beneath the rain. No celebration, no satisfaction, no triumphant speech, just exhaustion, because people misunderstood power. Real power doesn't need revenge. It simply removes support and lets consequences arrive on their own. As the jet door closed behind him, Singapore disappeared beneath the storm clouds, and for the first time that night, Ethan finally closed his eyes. 8 months later, Orion International Airways looked like a completely different company. The crisis that nearly destroyed the airline had forced a full restructuring from the inside out. Emergency debt agreements were stabilized, leadership was replaced, operational systems rebuilt, and through one of the largest recovery deals in the company's history, Ethan Park became a major shareholder of the airline he once quietly protected from collapse. Not through revenge, through leverage, through competence, through patience. The new policies were impossible to ignore. Bias prevention training became mandatory across all international terminals. AI-assisted boarding verification reduced discretionary profiling. Passenger dignity protocols were rewritten from scratch. The message was clear. Luxury would no longer depend on appearance. Only verification, only respect. And ironically, the airline became more profitable than before. Because trust scales faster than arrogance ever will. Victoria Hale disappeared from the corporate world almost overnight. No interviews, no public statements, no dramatic scandal headlines, just silence. Months later, she worked inside a small airport luggage store on the lower level of a regional terminal. The lighting was colder there, the uniforms simpler. Nobody recognized her anymore. Late one evening, a young traveler approached the counter carrying a small suitcase. "I only have Apple Pay." Victoria froze for half a second, and suddenly, the memory returned. The gate, the scanner, the green approval light, the man in the gray hoodie. This time, she answered differently. "Digital payment is perfectly fine." The terminal flashed green. Approved. And for the first time in months, Victoria looked relieved. Some people think power is loud, that it arrives with status, attention, or expensive suits. But real power is quieter than that. Sometimes, it looks like a tired man in a gray hoodie sitting alone beside a rainy airport window. And sometimes, karma waits patiently until the boarding door closes. Power doesn't always wear a suit, and karma never misses a boarding call. Thank you for flying with us tonight. Subscribe for more stories where karma always finds its destination.